special.
I want grumpy girl like that. So, what I need from you guys is to be a good audience. So, be on your best behavior. You're going to be completing page 106. 106. With the same depth that we are seeing, by the way, a lot of your notes are outstanding. It's cool because I can see, if you do this right, you are preparing for the walkway. Because the walkway is coming right directly from these questions. So, good detailed notes because you are preparing for a walkway. Beyond that, you're preparing for common knowledge of stuff you should know as an American, so you're not ignorant, so that you don't not know reality. So, anyway, turn the time over to Gage, be a good audience.
Business.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about 6 aspects between the 1820s and the 1860s. So I'm going to be talking about the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Bleeding Kansas, and then I'm going to go briefly into the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and then I'm going to go into the presidential election of 1860. So before I start, I want you guys to consider one question. We always talk about the Civil War being the bloodiest war, the worst war in American history, but how did it actually start? I want answers on this. Like, how do we learn how it actually starts? Like, do we go in depth? How are we told how the Civil War actually starts?
So, could you pause for a minute? Let me get the mic here because we are recording. You pass that to people speaking.
Okay, so how do we learn that? Like, how are we taught that the Civil War actually started?
They basically just say the North and South had a disagreement on slavery, and that started a war.
Okay, right. The South was for slavery. They were a big proponent of slavery, and the North did not like slavery. And then today the stereotype is that the North were the good guys and the South were the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's mainly the stereotype. Is there anything else that you guys think that we learned how the Civil War started? Evan?
We kind of get the idea that just kind of sprouted up. It didn't really have a starting point. It was just kind of tensions build, and then it happens. It doesn't really have like a specific starting point.
Okay. Anything else?
Like from the industrial aspect of it, like a war between 2 different economies and one not supporting the other, and what they're wanting for themselves from the other lands, and just
Okay. Okay, we'll go with 1 or 2 more. Austin?
I think a lot of times we learn about the beginning of the Civil War kind of pro-North. We kind of see it that the North were the good guys and the South were splitting off, and they weren't following what they were supposed to do. And so we kind of think that the North did the right thing, even though it may not have been entirely true.
Yeah, and that's mostly done because the North won the war, and that we now do not accept slavery. Royce, you want to? Okay, last one.
Okay, and then one of the other reasons is because I was talking with my uncle one day, and because I was telling him about my presentation, and he told me that one of the main reasons that the war started was because the North wanted some of the ports in the South, because they didn't have as many, and they weren't as big because the South was shipping so much cotton to like France and England and everything that their ports were a lot bigger for trade, so that the North also wanted those ports so that they could trade that.
All right, so we've talked about a bunch of different things, different ways that the Civil War started, but that's barely scratching the surface. I'm going to go into the meat of like why it actually started, how it actually started. Okay, so this is just how my slides are going to go. Central question up at the top that's going to probably be on a bunch of different slides, and then it's just going to have the question above, and then indented is going to be my answer and what you need to summarize. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on what's actually going on in the United States right now. Okay, so the year is 1820. We have 22 states, 11 states with a free senatorial influence, and 11 slave states. And the Missouri Territory has just entered an application to become a state. And then there's this conflict over the state status of Missouri. Now, why do you think that it would be such a problem if Missouri was either a slave state or a free state?
Royce, can you move the mic as he calls on
Dylan, I
people?
saw your hand first.
Move the mic as he calls on people.
Yeah. I saw Dylan's hand first. So why is it such a big deal? Why can't it just be one and then the next state will be the other side?
Because temporarily we tip the scale for one side, making one side.
Okay, explain that. Like, why is that a big deal?
So, if you know anything about like Senate and Congress, you get a certain amount of senators and representatives. So if it was a slave state, then there'd be 2 extra representatives for the slave state, and if it was a free state, then there'd be 2 more representatives for free states, and that would just overpower.
Okay, so you have Congress going on in Washington, and if you have more senators for not slavery than for slavery, then all of the decisions made in Congress are going to be against slavery. So that's why the country was like, well, we have to have the same amount of states on each side, the same on the different sides of slavery. And so this is really causing a conflict. So the country's main concern is that if they don't come up with a decent compromise, the country's just going to split apart, and then we're going to go into our civil war. Well, the year's 1820, you guys know that doesn't happen yet. So I'm going to go into the Missouri Compromise right here. So 1A, what were the terms of the Missouri Compromise? Okay, so the Maine territory would be accepted as a free state. So that little state that no one even cares about that brings in a bunch of lobster is coming into the United States. And then the Missouri territory will enter as a slave state. So now we're keeping our senatorial influence stable. So then there will be 12 free states and 12 slave states. So yes, it's balanced. And then here's the big thing. Slavery can no longer be practiced north of the line running west from the Mississippi River at the coordinates 36 by 30 degrees, except in Missouri. So I'm going to fast forward real quick. Okay, here. So you see this line going right here, okay? So that is running along 3630 on longitude, latitude. This is the Mississippi right here, okay? So what's going to happen is from here to there, you can't practice slavery north, you can practice slavery south, except for Missouri right here. So that's really important to understand, because as we get later into the different compromises and the different conflicts arising in the United States, you're going to need to realize that this line is still in play. So we're going to go back to my slide. So this is a super important line because it is going to help govern the country later in the coming years. So 1B, why was it proposed?
Can I jump in for just 1 second? Mm-hmm. What he is teaching you is going to be really critical for passing the walkaway. On the walkaway, did you take this walkaway in Flood's class?
Yeah, I passed 30 out of 30.
On the walkaway, there are more questions about the different compromises than any other single issue. So you have to be able to identify what was the Missouri Compromise, what was the Kansas-Nebraska Act, what was the compromise. You don't have to know them all. And all of the pieces he's teaching. So if you stay focused here and take really good notes, this will help you tremendously when it gets to taking the walkaway.
And I know that with different specialty areas, like you know the stuff, but we get deeper into this. I'm guessing that most of you guys don't know about this. I had no idea about this before I started, because we totally just kind of like, okay, so it's building up, and all of a sudden we have the Civil War because people like slavery and people didn't like slavery, so they started fighting. Yeah, Jessica?
Just an interesting fact. I didn't know the underground.
Wait, pass that mic over there so we can hear you.
Just an interesting fact. There was one time that I thought the Underground Railroad was actually like a little underground little railroad in a tunnel where the slaves rode on trolleys down to freedom.
Most people do. Still, adults still believe that. So.
Okay, so 1B, why was it proposed and why was it necessary? Okay, so it wanted to stop the nation uprising concerning slavery. Everyone was getting mad in the South and the North because what was happening was they were afraid that the South was going to get another state, and then the North would have a lesser senatorial influence. So then this is the big thing, is to balance slavery and slavery Senate influence. So that's the main reason you make sure that you have that down. Okay, so 1C, who proposed it? It's our great friend, Henry Clay. Now, if you remember him from, who presented about him? Was it? Yeah, Savannah presented about him. He was the guy who was in the War Hawks. He wanted war, okay? And now you're looking at him, and he is trying to come up with a compromise to prevent war. He's actually going to come up later in my presentation. I'm going to go over a quote, and you'll see just how much he changed. So he was an attorney, lawyer, and politician in Kentucky, and he was actually fairly well known just because he had a lot of good ideas. His main problem was that he had great ideas, but he didn't know how to execute them well. So if you remember, in his early life, he was a leader of the Warhawks. So we talked about that.
Which war was that?
That was the War of 1812. So, okay, 1D. What was the Missouri Compromise supposed to address? Sorry. So it's the Senate influence of Missouri, the Senate influence of Maine, slavery restrictions. We talked about that line. That's really important. Then they wanted to make the people happy. I've learned that you can't make everyone happy. You can make lots of people happy, but it's impossible to make everyone happy. So that was their main reason for making the compromise, and Henry Clay proposed it. You guys good? No? Okay, I'll give you 30 more seconds.
What do you personally think was right about the Missouri Compromise?
So they did try to control slavery. They set a direct boundary. That was super important. I think that, like, since there was a concrete line now, that it was a lot easier to govern, like where slavery could be practiced and where it couldn't be
In theory,
practiced.
you're not going to have any more debates.
Yeah, and so no debates over where it can be practiced.
So what do you think is wrong with this compromise?
So the fact that they were like, so if we go back here, the fact that they let Missouri, I don't know, I think that it's interesting that they let Missouri still be a slave state.
Even though it's north.
Even though it's north of the line, because you think about it, you have all these slave states down in this area right here, and you have this line right here, and then there's Missouri, and you have all these north states, and I can just imagine what they're thinking.
It's kind of like making a rule. This will never happen except for this one time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first time you've actually made the rule.
Yeah.
So you've broken the rule from the offset.
And the big thing you're going to see in all these compromises is that the people in the country start to trust the government less and less and less as time goes on. Okay. So, what was the result, and why did it fail? So there's the result right there. It failed. Big surprise. So the main problem was that it didn't solve the basic and root problem. So, and it's pretty interesting because people moving west, they took their own ways of life with them. They can settle up here in the Oregon Territory, and they can take slavery with them, even though that's north of the line. So that's a big problem right there. And so I have written in there, one party would take the idea of freedom west, while the other would take slaves with them. So that also caused conflict out west. And this didn't happen. I mean, like, people were expanding west a ton in the 1820s, but we have this gap between 1820 and 1850, and like we have the annexation of Texas, and we have all this time where all these problems arise, and pretty soon we're like, Henry Clay, you are an idiot. Even though it sounded like a great idea at first. And like I said, he has a lot of great ideas, he just doesn't know how to execute them well. Okay, so this is I showed you this is the line. We have the free states right here, and the slave states right here.
I believe there's a place where you're supposed to draw the line. Isn't there a place for you guys to draw that line somewhere?
Yeah, draw that line right now. So all you do is you go down the Mississippi River right to the southern border of Missouri, and then you just draw it straight left, and then you see the Bay Area right there, just like right below that.
Let me get there. What page are you guys on? 106?
It's on 109.
109? Okay.
Okay, I want you guys to realize also right here, look where this line goes right through. It goes right through California, right down the middle of California. That's going to cause some problems later on. Thank you.
Cell cars?
Okay, so I'll give you guys just another minute to draw that. Make sure you do it well.
Yeah, it's page 109. We've got the map. Thank you for pointing that out to me. That's fine. On 106 or 110. Label it so you know that's the compromise of the Missouri Compromise.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about two different compromises and a couple different acts. So make sure you know this is the Missouri Compromise. It took place in 1820. Okay. Okay, so you can still write this. You don't even have to write this down, so you can still draw that line. So popular sovereignty. This is a definition that you need to know. It's not a question, but you really need to know this for this next compromise. And popular sovereignty, in the simplest explanation, is rule by the people. So the people get to rule. The people get to make the decisions. So they are the source of political power. And so it helps the country. This is basically a way that like Congress can say, we really don't know, which they don't say that anymore, but they're like, we really don't know, so you guys make the decision. Yeah. Okay, so question 2, the Compromise of 1850. So just a little introduction. Now the year is 1850, and what happened in 1849, guys? The gold rush out in California. So California is like, okay, we got all these people out here. We now have enough people to become a state. We want to become a state really badly, but we have this problem with senatorial influence. So yeah, that might be a made-up word, senatorial, but it sounds really good. So we now Congress has now met to try and come up with the influence of the state. Okay, so what were the terms of the Compromise of 1850? There are a couple more terms here. California enters as a free state. Okay, New Mexico and Utah enters as a state. So we are now members of the U.S. So everyone can clap real quickly. Okay.
We entered the territory. We're not going to be a state till later.
Yeah, so we are actually a state. We're going to enter, but we aren't actually. We haven't. Our Senate influence has not been decided yet, and that will be decided by popular sovereignty, which we just talked about, rule by the people. So voting, and different people will be able to vote to decide the influence.
So if Utah was a territory in 1850, was New Mexico also a territory? Or
The problem in Utah is polygamy. And the rest of the nation wasn't willing to allow polygamy to enter, Utah to enter state until they addressed their issue of polygamy and made it illegal. So we're going to enter in much later than almost all the western states because of polygamy. But we now become an official territory.
Yeah, so Utah is now an organized territory, and what they're doing is like it's north of the line, but what the U.S. is doing is just kind of like, okay, we're going to consider you as a state right now just to make the southern people happy, just in case. Just because, not like considered as a state, but the territory will have Senate influence. So, well, I don't know. Did it actually have a Senate influence, or was it? No, it was just like
What it did is it allowed the federal government to send a territorial governor out here.
Yeah.
Because what was happening is Brigham Young had just taken over the state.
Yeah.
So the rest of the nation was like, great, you got all a bunch of Mormons who moved out there and they're making their own theocracy. And so they sent out, when they made it a territory, they sent out a territorial government or territorial governor. But we didn't get control, we didn't get a voice in the Senate or the House of Representatives till like, remember the year we come in, 1890 or something like that, really late. We're very, very late coming into the state because of, was that 96? So 1896, it's a long time. So we are a territory. The other issue is Utah was clearly going to be a free state. You saw what happened to them in Missouri because they came in as a free, a slave or free versus slave territory. So slavery was never really an issue. There were some slaves that came out here. When they got out here, they were freed.
So just to clarify, it's a territory. That's my typo on there, sorry. So we're entering as a territory, but there's still going to be a concrete slave or anti-slave. So we're not an actual state. But we've now been, so before it was just an unorganized territory, and they're like, okay, we all have all these Mormon boys out there, so we're just going to make it a territory. So then the next term is no one may trade or sell slaves in Washington, D.C., but they may still use slaves that they own. So that's pretty interesting. So now in Washington, D.C., they're like, okay, if you guys have slaves, sure you can use them, but you can't sell them anymore. You can't buy them anymore. There's nothing else going on there. So basically, you can go south of the line, buy some slaves, and bring them back, and you're not doing anything wrong. You can just use them. So this is the term that I have a problem with, because they're like, okay, you guys can still use your slaves, you guys can still have slavery, but you can't buy them here in Washington, D.C. And you can see how a problem might arise here. It's kind of a stupid term. Okay, so And here's something else. They said that escaped slaves must be immediately returned to their masters upon discovery. Now, if slaves escape to the north, how many northern people are actually going to return them to their masters?
Not very many.
Exactly. So that's a problem. This is not going to be followed. So as we can see, the farther we get into history, the worse these compromises are becoming. So this is a problem. 2B, why was it proposed?
Wait, before you go there, I
Uh-huh.
want to talk a little bit about escaped slave. This was a huge deal for people who were involved in the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go over one.
Okay, so then we'll leave that behind then.
Not with the kind of like the Underground Railroad. I'm just gonna go over something. You can talk about the Underground Railroad if you want.
Okay, so if you had escaped via the Underground Railroad, you didn't go to Canada, you went to Boston in the 1820s or 30s or 40s. Once you got into Boston, there was an assumption now that you are free, right? Well, with this compromise, if you escape to Boston, are you free now?
And
No,
if you're
because-
harboring them, you're now an outlaw.
Exactly. And legally, the police have to, with this compromise, arrest those former slaves, like Frederick Douglass, who's out on the speaking circuit. In theory, now with this, could be arrested and returned to the South as a slave. So this is something that very much angers the North, particularly abolitionists in the North. Because not only the North is an abolitionist. And I really like the way Gage said, we look at this as the North being the good guys, the South being the bad guys. The majority of Northerners are not abolitionists. The majority of Northerners aren't like singing Kumbaya with their black neighbor. They don't really like black people either. They're very racist. However, they want a free economy. Do you see the difference there? So this all of a sudden means there's not even necessarily a free economy in the North. Question or comment?
It doesn't say whether New Mexico was a free or slave state, but they still admitted New Mexico to the Union, right?
Well, it's going to be. We're not going to really talk about the outcome. We're talking about that its Senate influence will be decided by popular sovereignty, ruled by the people. They will decide what their influence is.
So New Mexico and Utah will come in as territories. And what it says is those two territories, not California, but New Mexico and Utah will be able to vote for themselves when they become states, whether they will be free or slave.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is the problem with that? If you change, is the line, is it an issue anymore? No, because California just came in below the line, right? As a
Yeah,
free
we
state.
just looked at this. Look, it goes right through California, okay? And it goes right south of Utah, and then here's New Mexico, right? Which side is it on? That side. There we go.
Yeah. So it throws out the Missouri Compromise and says from here on out, any state who joins the Union can vote themselves, popular sovereignty. They can determine the people of that state, not the federal government, will determine whether they're going to be free or slave.
Mm-hmm.
You got another question over here.
So was New Mexico a territory or a state in 18?
It's a territory in 1850.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so why was it proposed and why was it necessary? So I'm just going to throw this out here. This is my personal opinion, is that Congress didn't want to get in on this problem because they're like, okay, you guys decide. That doesn't happen very often, but they're just like, well, are they going to be a free or a slave state? And I'm like, well, let's let them decide. And it's like, well, we don't see that anymore. And a part of the reason why we don't see that anymore is because it causes so many problems. And as much as we're like, well, this is a democracy, we should be able to choose true democracy, there are problems that come with that. Although it's just a way of government, there are problems that come with a true democracy. So they wanted to solve this Senate influence problem while still keeping the people happy. And we'll talk about just how well that works. Okay, knock knock. Who's there? Henry. Henry who? Henry Clay. Great. Okay, so he's coming back to make another compromise. Great. 30 years earlier, what happened? He failed. So now is he going to fail again? We'll see. Probably.
Well, it says, why did it fail?
Allow him to, harass his
Well, he
dad
kept the
and
country
harass
together for 30 years.
Yeah, it worked for 30 years. Well, kind of.
He's not the president.
So they were just thinking, well, it kind of worked, and no one else is proposing good compromises. This is the best that they have, and so they have other compromises being proposed, but all of them have so many problems, and yet the country fails to see the problems in this compromise. So just for question 2C, you can write just Henry Clay and then explain like the same thing you did in like 1C or 1D, whichever one that was. Because it's the same guy, now he's just 30 years older. And then here's the quote by him. The Constitution of the United States was made not merely for the generation that then existed, but for posterity, unlimited, undefined, endless, perpetual posterity. I think this is a little bit of a different take than he had when he was part of the Warhawks. Yeah, a lot. Yeah. So he has changed a lot, including his hair, which is now gray. Okay, 2D. How did the Compromise of 1850 attempt to resolve conflicts over the expansion of slavery? Okay, so the Compromise was an attempt to have the people of the country make the final call as to the status of the state on slavery. They think that the people are going to be happy if they get to make the decision. That's their take. It's like, well, if they get to make a decision, they can't come complain to us and tell us that we did stuff wrong. The problem is, you have lots of people in each territory and state, so really how many people are going to be happy? So they also wanted slavery to be contained, and they're trying to keep this even number of states for Senate influence. 2E, why did it fail? Well, we all know Henry Clay proposed it, but that's not actually the reason. It's, while most of the country complied with the new laws, the rules were sometimes bent a lot. And then I have this story, it's a hunt and release story, and people from the north would actually go out and hunt slaves, like get them and capture them, and they bring them across the line. And that's it's like they're free. And if you remember, one of the terms is that if you find slaves, you have to return them directly to their masters. As you can see, this rule was bent and broken to the greatest extent. They were actually looking for slaves to bring over the line. So it's pretty interesting how great the rules were bent and broken. So here's the Compromise of 1850. We now have this free. We now have these two being decided by popular sovereignty. And look, all of a sudden that line is right there, and that's it. That's it. So it decreased a lot because of New Mexico Territory. Okay, question 3, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Oh, this is a great act. It's hilarious. Okay, so the year is 1854, and the United States wants to build a transcontinental railroad just to transport goods and make Chicago more acceptable. Chicago, okay, Chicago is growing a lot, and they want it to grow even more. They want it to become a metropolis. They want it to be huge. They want it to be the second capital of the nation, which now we look at Chicago, and it's a great safe place. So 3A, what were the terms of the Kansas-Nebraska Act? Okay, the use of slavery will be acceptable in Kansas and Nebraska territories. Well, this is a problem because that is the Kansas territory now, and that is the Nebraska territory now. Which, now you look at the line, there is no more line. Okay, they're just kind of throwing it out the window and just getting rid of the whole slavery restriction line. So this Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, it's no longer in effect. And then the primary goal will be to open trade routes to Chicago and to help expand west. Those are the two main goals. And from what I read, they were more like they wanted to build west, but they were really concerned with building to Chicago because it was growing so much. And they're like, well, this can open trade routes. We have all these industries in Chicago. Why can't we just take it from there and move them west? This will really help us expand. Why was it proposed, or why was it necessary? To increase the economic status of the United States, especially Chicago. I want you guys to really understand that it was all about Chicago at this point and expanding west. We all know about Chicago. And then to make the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad possible. So slavery was not acceptable north of that line, and now we have people, we have slaves here helping the railroad if it was voted on. And it ends up happening anyway.
Make sure as we leave that, that you understand, I'm really, really, really glad he went over popular sovereignty because it's a walkaway question. That ability for Kansas and Nebraska to vote for themselves on whether or not they would be slave or free is called what?
Popular sovereignty.
Good. Now, the truth is Kansas and Nebraska were more than likely to come in as free states. So the North was like, well, we'll make that law because then they'll probably come in as free anyway. But there were some people who said, and if they don't? What if a whole bunch of slave owners decide to move over into Kansas? They're right on the line. Then they could come in as slave, and that can be chaos. Which is what he'll talk about.
Chaos. Okay, knock knock. Who's there? Not Henry Clay. Oh, good. Okay, so the act was proposed by Stephen A. Douglas. We have all heard of Stephen A. Douglas, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. This is the same guy who was running for president a couple years later, and he was a smart man. He had a great influence in the world of politics, and he was like, so Henry Clay. He was super old, and he was no longer trusted because his compromises weren't working very well. So like, let's bring in this senator from Illinois, and they brought him in, and he proposed this act, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay, so why were the anti-slavery Northerners angry about the Kansas-Nebraska Act? So a lot of them weren't angry, like Miss Ness said, but there were some. And mostly because we have this little part of the line left, and now that is not in effect. We had this Missouri Compromise, and it set up this whole line, and within 34 years, it's all the way gone. So they're kind of thinking, well, the government can't be trusted anymore. This is mutiny. This is terrible. What's this whole popular sovereignty thing that they're talking about? Because we aren't seeing half of it. We're seeing some of it, but not half of it. So why did it fail? So yes, it failed. Not only did it fail, but it caused digression in the United States. And that's the last thing we need at this point is more digression. And that's just because people aren't trusting the government anymore. They don't like them. They don't want them anymore. It just kind of, we talked about the rubber bands being stretched as far as they can. Well, they're snapping one by one here. And pretty soon, it's just going to break into a civil war. I'll give you guys another minute to get that. And the main problem here was that anything north of that line was already free, and now they're like, now there's a chance that could be slave state. And they're like, what is wrong with you people? Okay, I'm going to go on. So, as you can see, we now have the Kansas Territory. And if you look at that line, it goes right here. So Kansas is just barely in the free part of the country. The Nebraska Territory, which is way up here, which it covers a lot of stuff north. Okay, Bleeding Kansas. This is my favorite part. Well, it's my second favorite part of the entire presentation because it makes me laugh. So this is basically the point where America goes, the government can't be trusted. Let's kill each other. So what happened was there were all these debates in Kansas. They were like trying to sway the votes of the people because it's a popular sovereignty. And so they're trying to sway the votes of the people. They're trying to make people realize that it's either just or unjust. And then pretty soon these farmers who are like, why are all these people here in Kansas where we're trying to farm whatever we farm in Kansas? And they come out and they start killing people with their pitchforks. And then there are people who come out with their shotguns and start killing people. And then pretty soon there's lots of blood on the ground in the middle of Kansas. And it makes me laugh.
See, counselor.
Yeah, it's funny, Kendall.
You're like way too close to being Mr. Vince. That's what I was
No.
Yeah, that's what
Sorry.
You're asking Mr. Vince right now.
No, I just think it's funny because we went from the Revolutionary War, don't die, just help our country, and now we're like, I hate my country. So 4B, how did Northerners and Southerners react to the events involving Kansas? So this started the first of the Great Civil War. This was the first. This is where the rubber band snapped. This is where everything started, right here. So people were fighting in the center of Kansas, and then it got broken up, and people went home, kind of, not really. The main problem here was that people were like, okay, Kansas can be a slave state, so like Miss Ness said, there were all these people from the South, and they were moving in, and they didn't have their slaves with them yet, but as soon as it was proclaimed, all of a sudden there would be all these slaves here, and it would become a problem. Okay, breaking news. Old dude beats other old dude with a stick. Okay, this is a true story. This is called the caning of Sumner. I'm going to read this. We interrupt this program to bring you breaking news from the Senate Hall in Washington. 2 days following the event known as Bleeding Kansas, there was a meeting called in the Senate Hall. Senator Charles Sumner, who had delivered his speech against the Kansas-Nebraska Act at the debates, was sitting in the far end of the hall. When Senator Preston Brooks, a senator supporting the act, approached him with a cane, a large, heavy, golden cane. Brooks expressed that he did not approve of Sumner's speech. As Sumner rose, something else rose, Brooks' cane, and it struck Sumner on the head. Sumner fell to the ground under his desk, which was bolted to the floor. He then tore the desk off of the floor and threw it at Brooks, or so he thought. You see, he was now blinded from the blow to the head. But he missed Brooks entirely. Brooks then proceeded to strike Sumner over and 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 over until his cane broke. After that, he started to hit harder, over and over and over and over and over and over and over until Sumner was all but dead. As Sumner was not lying on the ground, losing quite a large amount of blood, Brooks took a moment to say a few words to the other senators present. "Ha," he said, then proceeded out of the hall unchallenged. Sumner was taken to the nearest hospital, and we will keep you updated in the coming hours. At the moment, his condition is critical but stable, and the scene is under further investigation. Thank you, and back to your program. This was a true story. It's called The Caning of Sumner, and it's part of just this whole fiasco that's going on. And
That's too bad we didn't have C-SPAN then. You know where they tape the hall and
we'll talk about that. It's pretty interesting that we went from this Kansas-Nebraska Act to within 2 days, everyone's beating each other on the head with a stick, making them blind. It said, from the thing I read, he was partially blinded from the blow to the head, and then after that, the blood from his head had rushed down and covered his eyes, and so he couldn't see at all. So, the end. Okay, 4C, what were the consequences? Whether for better or for worse, there were 3 major consequences. First, many innocent lives were lost. Second, Douglas was never elected president due to this fiasco. Lastly, no one trusted the government anymore. So that second one, whether it was good or bad that Douglas was never elected, Douglas was still never elected, so it was a consequence. And so this was the first major sign that the United States would soon be engaged in the Civil War, is that people were fighting each other with their pitchforks and shotguns. Okay, so the next questions. Okay, so you don't have any more questions on there. I need you to write 2 more questions. So number 5 is going to be, what were the key arguments?
There might be a space for him to do that. Let me look.
Is there? Okay, but these are
What's the last consequence?
that.
No, just there really is.
So the last consequence
Maybe you can write it on the bottom.
was
of 107. There's a
that
little
no one
space
trusted the
there.
government anymore. Okay, so 5, what were the key arguments in the Lincoln-Douglas debates? And 6, what happened to political parties during the election of 1860, and how does that reflect regional divisions with the United States in the following years?
Actually, I lied. You can go on to page 110. This will help you a little bit. Because we're going to be doing this next time, and if he's going to cover some of this here, this will help you a bit.
So I don't know if it says what you actually answering the questions, you're just writing them somewhere.
You can have him go ahead and write it in here. That'll save
Yeah,
you time
right.
when I get there.
Yeah,
so
write
it's on
it in
page
there.
110. He's on page 110. It has the key arguments of the Lincoln-Douglas debate. If you notice, there's a Venn diagram here where we're going to talk about the key arguments tomorrow. We're going to listen to the debates.
I'm just going to go with the real basic.
Or next time we meet. So this could kind of set you up a little bit for that if you want to answer the questions there.
I'm just going to go with the real basic.
Right here.
I'm not going to go super far into the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I'm just going to go
For
into
fun.
what happened, what they were arguing about, debating about. Sorry, it's different.
In theory.
Yeah. So just a little bit of information about the Lincoln-Douglas debates right now. While you're sitting here, you don't have to write this down. These are some of the most important debates in American history, and it's because it has set up an entire debate structure for debate teams now, and it has in the last 100 years. It's just that people now use this form of debate as an official form. Okay, you guys close?
Questions or the answers?
Questions so that you can have the answers. He hasn't given you any answers.
Okay, so, and in this corner, we have Lincoln, and then in this corner, we have Douglas, and too bad they aren't going to fist fight, they're just going to talk, yell at each other. Yeah, I know, Lincoln was like, what, 6'4"? It was awesome. I wish he would have fought Douglas. Okay, so these debates were some of the most important and influential debates in history. So I'm going to have this little quote from history.com. Historians have traditionally regarded the series of 7 debates between Stephen A. Douglas and Abraham Lincoln during the 1858 Illinois state election campaign as among the most significant statements in American political history. The issues they discussed were not only critical they were not only of critical importance to the sectional conflict over slavery and states' rights, but also touched on deeper questions that would continue to influence political discourse. As Lincoln said, the issues would be discussed long after these poor tongues of Judge Douglas and myself shall be silent. So this, I'm going to go over the arguments in just a minute, but they were talking at each other. They were just debating at each other nonstop, quite a few times in different locations. They were just going all around the state of Illinois and sometimes a little bit out of the state. Upstate, on Sumner Watch, we all wanted to let you know how Sumner's doing. This just in, Sumner is well on his way to recovery. He's barely coherent, but he has expressed that he thought he was going to live. On the other hand, he also thought that America was going to live, so we're not sure if we should take him seriously. Luckily, we have just received word that Brooks was beating Sumner long enough that a senator with an interest in art was able to take a picture of the beating. We now have concrete evidence that Brooks actually did beat Sumner, but police will not take any action to arrest him. Thank goodness for senators. Thank you. Now back to your program. What? His vision actually came back after they cleared up the blood, and then it took him a while, but his vision actually came back. So back to Lincoln-Douglas debates. Sorry for the interruption. So in one of these early debates, Douglas took a shot at Lincoln about slavery, and he responded with, "This declared indifference, but this declared indifference, but as much as I think convert real zeal for the spread of slavery, I cannot but hate. I hate it because of the monstrous injustice of slavery itself. I hate it because it deprives our Republican example of its influence in the world, enables the enemies of free institutions with plausibility to taunt us as hypocrites, causes the real friends of freedom to doubt our sincerity, and especially because it forces so many really good men amongst themselves into an open war with very fundamental principles of civil liberty, criticizing the Declaration of Independence and insisting that there is no right principle of action but self-interest." So this is the main argument all about slavery, and this is interesting. What state was Senator Douglas from?
Illinois.
Illinois. Is Illinois a free or a slave state?
Free.
Yet, he is for slavery. It's pretty interesting.
What?
He thinks that slavery is he actually didn't think that it was great at first. Then later on, he was like, this can really help my campaign. So he was for slavery. And then, Douglas was for slavery. And then Lincoln was...
Always for the power.
And then it was, Lincoln was against slavery. And it wasn't like Douglas was diehard slavery, but he purposefully, in all of his debates, he would not address slavery as he didn't want it. Because that way, there was a chance that people in the North would like him, and the people in the South would like him, because they are so against Lincoln, because he's so against slavery, which is very apparent in this quote right here. So the debates lasted from August 21st to October 13th of 1856. Finally, the election votes were casted, and Lincoln beat Douglas quite easily by 10% of the popular vote. And in one of his final debates, he said that the country would not last forever with half of its citizens for slavery, half of them against it. Time will only tell that he was absolutely correct. So he was a very smart man. He was able to see what was coming. So this is the election of 1860. I'm just going to go into it. The presidential election of 1860, Lincoln beat Douglas by 10% of the popular vote. This election is what thrust the nation into the Civil War. This is why the Civil War started. This was the last straw. What happened to I had to go over the political parties, what happened there, and the territorial opinion of the nation. So as soon as Abraham Lincoln beat Stephen A. Douglas, the nation was split into two groups. We already had the North and the South. There was then the Union and the Confederacy. And so as far as political parties went, Republican was very dominant in the North and supported Abe Lincoln, while the Democratic Party was split, but most of it was stationed in the South. And this made Lincoln's presidency probably the most difficult presidency in the history of our nation's leaders. And so more on the Confederacy. what happened was that 7 states in the South, they just like said, okay, we're being our own country. They split off, and they made something called the Confederacy. They were their own country, and they were like, we will not comply with the rules that the nation has set, and we are now our own. We are now ourselves. You can't control us. And this is what started the Civil War, as you can imagine. And it wasn't like Abe Lincoln was elected and now the Civil War started. It's been going on for a while. It's been building up a while, and then this was just like, it's now started. It was, the South was just like, we don't have to listen to you. We want slavery. So we are coming out of this. Okay, so this is my conclusion. Some of the most important events leading up to the Civil War were the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, Bleeding Kansas, and the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858-59, and the presidential election of 1860. The Confederacy was formed and then immediately turned against the United States. All of these events combined is known as the breakdown of reasoned discourse. I don't know if any of you know that for the walkway, but that's what this whole, from 1820 to 1860, all these events are known as the breakdown of reasoned discourse. And the United States was about to become a bloody battleground. But before we finish, update on Sumner Watch. A final report has been brought in from the hospital. America has been killed as we anticipated, and Sumner has now died due to skeletal damage, memory loss, lack of brains of being a senator, and loss of bloods. Thank you. No, he didn't actually die until 1872, but I made a good point for my presentation. And so those are my sources. Okay, here we go. Here we go, starting. Everyone be quiet.
What's the question?
No, this is Specialty Area 27 Compromise. I'll read the question. Which compromise took place in 1850? This is a hard one.
I knew that was a hard one.
Oh wait,
All right. For all of you that got it wrong, my heck.
Can't help it. You're just too dumb.
Okay, so it was the Compromise of 1850.
Way to go.
Lincoln Douglas, who proposed the Kansas-Nebraska Act? Henrietta Claylietta. Okay. Hey guys.
Remember the rules.
Remember.
As soon as they're ready to go over it, you got to be quiet.
Okay, I'm just gonna go over each answer. So after you scream because you're in first or you got it wrong, just quiet down. Stephen A. Douglas proposed the Kansas-Nebraska Act. That was his act.
And
Lincoln
remember that
Douglas.
these all show up on the walkaway. Corey can tell you he's taken the portion of this walkaway. You do need to know them all. So you got to listen to him when he tells you afterwards so you get it right.
How did the attitude of Henry Clay change as he became a politician? This one's a lot of words, so read it carefully.
Oh, wait. To be kind of vegetarian.
Okay. So remember, in his
3, 2, 1. Guys, we'll have to stop the game if you can't get it quiet when he goes over it with you.
guys, this is an awesome coup. 16 questions. Come on. Okay, so remember, in his early life, he was part of the War Hawks, and he wanted war, and then he did not want war later in his life as he became a politician. Just 10 of you got that one wrong. Emily, which organization was Henry Clay part of in his early life? I just said that. Oh yeah, you guys are awesome. Way to go. There you go. All right, don't even need to go to that one. The Warhawks. Where was Stephen A. Douglas from?
Oh, crap nuggets.
Whoa, that came in fast. That was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
6 points behind.
Okay, at least none of you chose India. I wouldn't have been worried. What was the result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act?
It failed.
No, like I moved.
Oh shoot! I didn't press
Oh,
it.
come on!
One person has an answer.
Yes!
Okay.
6 points. 38 points.
Okay, now remember that the direct result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act was Bleeding Kansas, but it in turn led to the Civil War. It was the first main sign of the Civil War. True or false? Slavery could be practiced in modern-day Oregon after the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. Okay, if you look at the Kansas-Nebraska Act, if it were to be passed, it still would not allow slavery in Oregon because it was too far west. Who won the presidential election of 1860?
I wonder why.
You're stupid. Okay, there's a new answer. Gabe said that his stupid phone won the presidential election of 1860. No, you know, if it's between your stupid phone and Donald Trump, I might have to choose your stupid phone. Okay. I'm not sure who chose George Washington, but why was Stephen A. Douglas not elected into office in 1860? Okay, he was not trusted after bleeding Kansas. It was a direct result of what he did, so that was the main reason why he was not elected. There were a couple other smaller reasons, but that was the main reason. Sarah, working up there. True or false, the Missouri Compromise was passed in 1830?
No. Oh, really?
Guys, 1820. 30-year period in between 1820 and 1850.
I knew you switched it. I thought the blue one was false.
My bad. What was Lincoln's stand on slavery?
Enslave more people.
Wait, no!
Oh, crap.
Remember, the main point of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, he wanted to abolish slavery. What is popular sovereignty? Star Wars.
Popular sovereignty.
Okay, pretty interesting.
Okay, it's not.
Pretty interesting. Okay, so it is ruled by the people. That's a simple answer. But if you remember, Congress, they stayed out of it, thinking that in 1850, thinking that making the state status of the Senate influence by popular sovereignty would make people happy, but it didn't make people happy necessarily. So pretty interesting. You guys all, no one chose that one.
You can understand how, I mean, popular sovereignty kind of sounds like, well, let me pick something, right?
Yeah.
The problem with that is, if you live in Massachusetts, why should the people of Kansas be able to change the Senate of the government of the United States?
Yeah.
Why should that group of people who are temporarily in that state, some people have been there for 3 months, why should they be able to decide the entire focus of the nation? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. What was the main issue presented in the Lincoln-Douglas debates? Watch out, this is a tricky one.
All of them.
No. The main argument presented.
You should have said.
Slavery in general. What was the main purpose of the Kansas-Nebraska Act? The main purpose.
I guess. Or am I going to run?
Okay. Oh.
Can you go back to finish your answer?
Yes, you can.
You can?
The back button.
Good place.
Okay. Okay, the other one, I may, if there were a lot of people that chose green, I might accept that, but it's pretty obvious. Open trade routes to by railroad to Chicago and west. Remember we talked about Chicago a lot. What was the popular vote margin between Douglas and Lincoln in the election of 1860?
Oh, I hit the wrong button. 100%.
I'm going faster just because I missed one.
That's the
That's like 4.
3. I'm in like. Dude, answer. If I know he's not answering until the very end.
Noah? 10%.
See, I'm catching up.
Okay, I'm 4 points behind you there.
Okay, just a couple more questions.
I want to ask on that one. Oh, wait.
Okay, bonus question. Due to the railroads built later, which answer best describes modern day Chicago?
That one.
This is just a little
God,
something I
clicked on
learned.
the yellow one.
I
Clicked on
did too.
blue.
This is a bonus question. We didn't talk about
I
this.
just clicked on a random one. It was like orange or yellow. Wait,
You know, it's pretty interesting. Okay, so a large immigrant population lives there, especially Polish people, which is interesting. Yeah, so my brother got a position called Poland, so I was kind of looking at stuff, and Polish people live there a lot, so pretty interesting. So what did you want to say about?
Oh, back on where he was talking about the 10% margin. We're going to spend time on this next time, but it is important to know in 1860, the party, like, and you may see this. I don't know what's going to happen right now with the current election. It's a mess. But, like, Southerners in the Democratic Party were not happy with Stephen Douglas. And so the Democratic Party split. It divided into two different parties. In '56, the year that they're having the debates, the Republican Party arose. So the Republican Party was a new political party based on an anti-slavery platform. Their first presidential candidate was John C. Fremont, the guy from the Western Story in California. So now it's 4 years later, 1860. Lincoln's running for president for the Republican Party. The Democratic Party splits into two different parties. One.
Guys, just listen.
Still have 5 minutes. One of their candidates is Douglas, and then another candidate, I believe, is a guy Breckinridge. And then a fourth political party starts called the Constitution Party. Mm-hmm. So what happened, and I mention this because I don't know what's going to happen with the in Ohio and in Florida. Is Florida Democrats having their
What does this mean?
So I don't know what's going to happen this summer, but this summer both the Democrats and Republicans are going to meet and have their conventions. It is possible that the Republican Party may end up splitting. I mean, that's the debate right now is Republicans, some people are saying, look, if you elect Trump, we're going to split off, make our own. Who knows what will happen? We'll see that in a couple of months, right? But what happened in 1860 is the parties all fractured, and instead of 2 primary candidates running for president, 4 primary candidates were running for president. So Lincoln won, but he didn't win like you got 60%, you got 40%, because there were actually 4 people running for president. And we're going to show that to you next time, but I want to make sure you recognize it's not just Douglas versus Lincoln. It's Douglas versus Lincoln versus Breckinridge versus Bell. There are 4 major candidates running for president, which meant Lincoln got the majority, but he didn't win one southern state. So he won president of the United States of America without one southern state voting for him. So that causes a lot of conflict. And he said, as he said, the South said, well, back this crap. You just elected the president without one vote from us. Clearly, our vote no longer matters in the United States, and they pulled out.
Didn't Breckinridge get the vice presidency?
No. They pulled a whole different guy, which we'll talk about later. Okay, let's let him finish up here, please.
Well, that was my last question, but I just want you guys. Okay, congratulations to Jess. I don't have.
Yeah, Jessica, good job, Jessica.
So I hope you guys learned something about how the Civil War actually started. Like all your answers at the beginning were right, but it was just scratching the surface. So I hope you guys realize how it was building up for 40 years until it actually split, and even before that a little bit. So it was all building up, and so I hope you guys learned something from my presentation.
Excellent. Let's give Gage a hand, please.